Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My name is Kevin Carey. I'm the director of the Education Policy Program here at New America. A welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for coming here for what is going to be a great discussion on a rainy Thursday morning in Washington, D.C. So extra welcome for coming through the raindrops to be here with us this morning about a new poll on higher education that we at New America have published today. It's really interesting. We are going to spend a lot of time this morning both digging really deep into the results of the poll, but then also bringing a lot of the people represented in the poll, students, practitioners, to come and talk and really dig through a lot of the interesting dimensions of the issue. So I'm just going to start with a few opening thoughts before turning it over to our experts. The poll is on higher education, and I think the good news is that Americans really believe in higher education. And I feel like maybe now especially something that we can all believe in together, regardless of our political affiliations, our ideas about different things, feels especially important. And this poll suggests that we are, as a society, as a polity, as a culture, remain very committed to higher education as an engine of economic opportunity, something that we believe in, and that both in general and that we want for ourselves and for our children. However, and I think a lot of the most interesting things about this poll come in the however part of it. Once you get beyond that general support, you start to find some really interesting ideas and perceptions among the general public. Although people believe in higher education generally, they are not satisfied with the specific institutions and policies that we have in place right now. They are broadly dissatisfied. The poll, and you'll be able to go online and actually play around with this yourself, and we'll show it to you in a few minutes. Break down the respondents. It's a poll of 1,600 people by their age, by their background, by their political leanings. And there are some interesting differences in there. But broadly speaking, people are not happy with the specific system of higher education we have now. And we can think what's happened and the different reasons for that. But one of the really striking findings that I think come out of there is that people feel that colleges and universities are putting their own interests ahead of those of student interests. They believe in them generally, but they don't think that the system is working for students. And that's true in different ways for different kinds of people. So we at New America feel like the results of this poll actually can be very positive in that they really, they are evidence for a strong bipartisan foundation for higher education reform. People believe in it generally, but they want it to be better. They are not satisfied with the arrangements we have now. They are not satisfied with the institutions that we have now. They are not satisfied with the policies we have now. They think we can do better. They think we need to do better. And we think they're right about that. Again, I thank you for coming. And with that, I'm going to quickly yield the podium to our senior higher education analyst and the leader of this project, Rachel Fishman, who is going to give us a great presentation breaking down all the numbers, showing you how you can break down all the numbers, and from there we've got a couple of really terrific panels lined up, and it's going to be a great discussion this morning. So, Rachel.
Good morning, everyone. It's so heartening to see a full house given the weather, which is awful. So I thank you so much for joining us today as we launch this data and the data tool. So I'm going to discuss the findings of our first annual survey that Kevin alluded to in his open remarks. This survey is about how America perceives and what they know about higher education. And, it's our hope that these findings are going to provide a crucial background about America's thoughts and feelings on higher education. And we can then use this data to help inform discussions that both the media has and the policymaking community has. So the full write-up of the methodology, including all the scientific, plus or minus 2.8 percentage points, is online at varyingdegrees.org. But to give you a little bit of background, we conducted this survey and went into field right after the inauguration, and we collected cell phone and landline interviews of 1,600 Americans ages 18 plus. We included booths of African American, Asians, Hispanics, and also current undergraduate students to help improve our statistical power when filtering with these results. The survey shows both unifying themes as well as differences across a whole host of demographics: age, gender, generation, region, socioeconomic status, race, student status, educational attainment, political ideology. And we explored the themes of the value of a college education, who is responsible for student success, the ideal role of government, and the goal of higher education itself. So first, what I'm going to go over is some of our top findings, and then I'm going to go through some of the findings a little bit more in detail. So Americans are split in their belief about whether there are lots of well-paying jobs that require college degrees. So slightly over half agree that there are lots of well-paying jobs that do not require going to college. However, there is wide belief, 3 out of 4 people say, that in the end, it's easier to be successful with a college degree than without. So although people are kind of mixed with whether or not jobs are available without that degree, they certainly agree that if you have the degree, you're more likely to be successful. So this survey shows that Americans are valuing the importance of a college degree, but they believe that higher education is falling short of this promise. So only 1 in 4 agree that our higher education system is functioning fine just the way it is. And we're hoping that the panelists are going to provide some context as to why this could be a case. We didn't then ask, well, why is it not fine? A lot of it probably has to do with price and cost, but there's probably more to unpack within that. And then there is belief that higher ed is falling short of its promise. So over half believe that institutions need to be student-focused, and that it's the case that that students are not the ones solely responsible for the success of their students, that institutions also have to be helping students to cross the finish line. So now I'd like to unpack the results a little bit further. So it's clear that the Americans think that it's getting harder to achieve the American dream in terms of finding a good paying job and being able to afford a family. So we asked people, is it harder now than it was for your parents to find a good job and be able to afford a family? And overall, 3 out of 5 think it's harder to find a well-paying job, and just over 3 out of 5 feel the same way when it comes to affording a family. When we broke this out by generation, the oldest generation, the silent generation, was the one that actually wouldn't agree with this because their parents actually grew up during the Great Depression, so that makes sense. But everybody else is pretty much aligned with, it's getting harder and harder for all of us. As the data have shown, the American dream is falling further out of reach, but higher education is seen as important to being successful in this economy in terms of if you have that credential, you are more likely to be successful. However, there's this expectations gap between what higher education should be and what it currently is. So 58% of Americans see college leaders as putting the long-term interests of their own institutions ahead of those of their students. And while Americans agree that most who enroll benefit, so nearly 4 out of 5 say this to be the case, too few have a decent chance of getting into a good college. So only 42% of Americans think all Americans have a decent chance of getting into a good college. This is indicative of that access problem. And then we all know, a lot of people in the room, that we have this access problem, but we also know that there is this completion problem. And Americans are aware that many students leave before completing their degree. Only 46% think it's true that most people who go to college finish with a degree. And so then we asked also, trying to gauge, do people see this as a personal benefit, an individual benefit, or is higher education seen more as a social, societal good? And as it turns out, 62% see higher ed being more as good for society rather than a benefit to students. And when you include people who think both of those things, both an individual and a private good, the number goes up to over 70%. So it's clear that from this data that, okay, it's a good for society, and this is sort of regardless of demographic. We thought it was really interesting that conservatives and liberals aligned on this issue. We thought maybe conservatives would think it was more an individual benefit, but no, that's not the case. Across the board, regardless of demographic, people see higher education as more of a societal good. However, it's clear that we're not funding it that way, or Americans don't perceive us to be funding it that way. Students and families are seen as picking up most of the tab, with government being seen as picking up less than half the associated costs. And so there's a lot going on with this slide, but we asked about specific colleges and universities, so two-year community colleges, four-year public universities, and the private four-year institutions and the for-profit universities. And then we asked each of these questions that you see on the top columns. And as you can see, that two-year and four-year public universities lead in many categories. They're seen as especially worth the cost compared to other sectors, and for people in my situation. So I'm just going to let this sink in. But I think this is really good news for community colleges especially. I think when we started this work, not knowing what the American public would actually think, because we're really in the weeds on this stuff, I would have said I would have been shocked to see how positively community colleges are being viewed, given that, I think there's maybe some stigma surrounding what it is to go to a community college or what it is to be a community college student. But actually our data show that that is not the case. And I do wonder if we had done this survey 4 years ago, what the data, or 10 years ago, what the data would have looked like. Would it have looked less rosy for the community college sector? Would it look rosier for the for-profit sector, who's experienced a lot of very public decline over the last couple of years? Would the four-year public sector 10 years ago been looked more positively because it was more invested in, and as we've witnessed all the disinvestment, the students and families have been facing higher and higher prices. And so I think moving forward, as this is our first annual poll, this is the baseline, it will be interesting to see how some of these sentiments change over time. And so I'm going to put a tool in, if you haven't visited our data at varyingdegrees.org. There's a whole bunch of information there, including the report narrative. We focused on differences among generations. But we also have this cool data tool that you can, on the left side, as you see, you can actually scroll through all the questions we ask. You can then just see what the results are overall, but you can also filter by all the demographics I discussed at the beginning. Not only that, you can embed these images into any blogs that you're working on or any web material that you're working with, or you can actually download the images and place them into any sort of report you're writing, anything that will help you out. So we really wanted to be public with the data, and we wanted you to be able to plug and play this data as you see fit over time. And you also picked up these perception versus reality sheets when you came in. So you can see how the perception of Americans actually matches up to the reality of what our higher education financing structure looks like and what today's students look like. If you go online, you can take a quiz to see if you actually know the reality of what the higher education financing system and today's student looks like. But of course, if you have this sheet, you'd be cheating. So don't look at the sheet before you take it, or look at it, and I expect all of you to get 100% on it. So that's a really fun little tool that we've included. So what I'd like to do right now is open it up for any questions that people might have about the data. I'm happy to answer. Otherwise, we're going to go into the first panel. We have a microphone, so that people who are live streaming, hello, people who did not come through the rain to visit us today, so that they can hear your question.
So you surveyed 1,600 folks. Can you tell us a little bit about why 1,600 and how you found those 1,600 and why that was the right number?
Sure. So initially, for a national representative poll, it's usually around 1,000, a little over 1,000 people that you'd interview. As I mentioned, we did boosts for African American, Latino, and Asian and current undergraduate students, in order that we would have a large enough N size that we could say we could make conclusions about those different groups. And so that's how we ended up getting to 1,600. That's why it's a little bit larger than maybe what you're used to seeing if you're, looking at a governmental poll and it says, we've surveyed 1,002 Americans, plus or minus 3%. This one was higher because we did those boosts. We found undergraduate students by looking at, and Ipsos, by the way, fielded this survey. So they were the ones who did the whole methodology, and you can read about it online. But they went they looked where a lot of college students would be, so college towns. So our current undergraduate sample is probably trends. The boost itself trends more towards traditionally aged residential students, but overall, we also got a considerable amount of that sample from the non-boosted portion, and those are reflective of non-traditional students, if that makes sense. Any other questions? Oh, there's one in the back. The microphone is coming.
Yes, thank you. I wondered what your feelings are on what I've seen on television, a news report on hiring in New York City. They indicated that a 4-year degree, college degree, was the equivalent of what high school used to be for a file clerk. There were that many applicants, so they merely upgraded the educational requirements. Do you see this continuing as a problem, or is it a problem? What are your feelings on something like this?
So I think it's hard to say because we didn't ask anything specifically pertaining to that, but I can say that I think this might be some of that feeling that goes into 1 in 4 people saying higher education is not fine how it currently operates. I think some of that is the anxiety people are feeling of up-credentialing, the price of higher education, the connection between higher education and the workforce, which we're going to hear more about in our second panel, which will probably provide great context for that. But I do know in the online web portion of the report, I interviewed someone. The personal story I share is Megan, and Megan went to college. She got her bachelor's degree. She studied to work in a museum, and she entered the workforce, when it was the downturn. And in 2008 is when she graduated. So she graduated right into the brunt of the economic recession, and she only just obtained her first full-time job at the age of 28. And she argues that, did she need her college degree to even get the full-time job that she has? Probably not, but it's starting to be like everybody who has that job has a college degree, and she feels very mixed about higher education. She's like, I would definitely do it again. I recommend that everybody go on to college, but I just, in a way, I just wish it wasn't so expensive. I have a little star on there. I wish it was just a little bit different. So I feel like we saw that sentiment in that 1 out of 4 believe that higher education is operating okay, which means that approximately 3 out of 4 think that something needs to change with the system. And so I think that's coming at all angles, both with moving through the workforce from higher education. Oh, Deb has a question.
So Rachel, we're in Washington, D.C., and you said you pulled up some demographics also looking by political affiliation. Was there something that stood out in the survey of variance? Because you shared where you saw consistency even when you broke it out by political affiliation. Something that stood out to you as a variance by looking by political affiliation.
Sure, and I'd like to mention too, that is a great comment, and Deb has actually helped us with this work by sitting on our advisory board for this work. But so you are able to download the data from the data tool so that you can actually upload it into Stata or whatever you want to do and play with it yourself. You're also able to download the crosstabs, and on the crosstabs are statistical significance. So where you want to see, were there statistical significant differences between liberal versus conservative? And we saw some interesting differences, I think, especially when it came to the for-profit sector. Conservatives tended to view the for-profit sector more positively than than the other, not then compared to liberals. So I thought that was one that jumped out at me and didn't surprise me necessarily. But I think some of the most surprising findings about the liberal versus conservative is actually where people align. Because when we talk about moving forward and crafting policy and having these discussions, it's going to be more about where they align. And honestly, like I said, when we went into this work, I really thought there was going to be a difference in between conservatives viewing higher education more as an individual benefit, because we constantly hear this, like, you know, individual benefits, individuals should pay. And so we thought that was going to be what people were going to say. And then that was our hypothesis, and it was totally proven wrong by this data, because they're totally aligned, conservatives and liberals, when it comes to this is something that is that is a good for society. And my question after that is, well, why aren't we funding it that way? And so I think I'd like to turn it over now to the student panel. So we're really excited to have some students in the room to talk about their experiences with higher ed. So we're first going to hear from current students and how they view higher ed, and hear them speak about some of these survey results. And then we're going to hear from some policy experts and institutional leaders on how we can translate America's perceptions to policy. So I'm going to ask the students to come up, and our moderator is here. She is just getting ready and will be forward shortly. So if the students could come up. But thank you, and be sure to visit the tool. And also, I do have to make a big plug and say that my colleagues Ernest Iswego, Manuela Okowo, and Tyler Richardit were amazing at getting this off the ground, and we really couldn't have done it without them. I have to say, we got the data back about 6 weeks ago, and this is what we turned it into. And our web developer, Kirk, did an amazing job with the tool. So I'd be remiss if I didn't thank them, because this was truly a team effort on the New America side. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Daniel Douglas. I'm going to turn it over to Daniel Douglas Gabriel, and we have our three students. So we have Lindsay Shirtliff from Nova Community College, along with Ariel from Nova Community College, and Jamesco, who is a Southern New Hampshire University student, and I believe 2 of you are graduating very soon. So congratulations to them. And so we're really excited to hear what you have to say, and thank you so much for joining us this morning. And I'm going to turn it over to Danielle.
Thank you guys so much for joining us. My name is Danielle Douglas Gabriel. I'm a reporter at the Washington Post, and I cover the economics of higher education. And we are trying our best to look at the full universe of students as well as faculty and how higher education is changing. And I think that's why it's so great to have these 3 students with us today. Guys, let's start off by you telling me a little bit about what your experience was like applying to college, and you can talk about the support systems and just overall how you would characterize that. Feel free to go down low.
Okay, so the first time around, because I went to college first out of high school, I applied to a bunch of schools, and so you've got fees and different essays, and it was fine. It worked well. And the second time around, just applying to all different schools, again with the fees, again with the essays, but it worked out. It was good.
I'm starting out. So I started out with the intention of going to a community college. It was right down the road from where I lived in California, and but I did feel a little bit of pressure to go to a Cal State 4-year school, and so I went that avenue, and I really didn't feel very successful. I only went 2 semesters, and then went to the community college. And after that, I took a 10-year break. And my husband, who was in the community college at that time, he finished his degree, and he went the path of community college to 4-year and to finish up at law school. And so he went that path, and then now I'm back in. But I'm pursuing a specific degree, which is dental hygiene. So for me, it was very specific, and applying for that program was quite a challenge coming back in because it's such a competitive program. So that's kind of been my experience, and I'm just finishing up my first year, so I have one more year to go. But I think it was a good experience.
For myself, I honestly didn't think that college was within reach. I barely graduated high school with a 1.6 GPA, so college just wasn't in the picture. I did one semester in 2009, and I failed every class. So essentially, I didn't really focus on it for 5 years until I hit the glass ceiling at my job. And at that point, I was also a father, so I knew that I needed to obtain education to, financially empower my family and myself. And so, 5 years later, here I am trying to get my foot back in the door to access college, and how am I going to pay for college? I was fortunate enough to have joined a program in Northern Virginia Community College, where they have advisors, specialize in case management, and they pretty much individualized my case, and they were able to help me get my foot back in the door as far as just applying for admission to college, because I didn't even know how to do that. They walked me through the financial aid process, and they pretty much broke down everything I needed to know to balance my work and personal life and school life as well. So that really enabled me to be successful in college and just make it easy to access college as well.
So it feels like the advisement piece was
Absolutely.
really important for you. So I'm wondering, for the two of you who transferred, what was that experience like? How did advisors come into play in getting you into your new school and helping you kind of navigate the system?
My first time in college, I went to Catholic University. I didn't know I had an advisor. There was no help whatsoever to even go through your program evaluation, any of that. The second time around at Southern New Hampshire University, I do have an advisor. She sits, she asks, what do you like? What's your passion? Because when you're taking social sciences or courses, math courses, things that maybe are not your core requirements, you want something that interests you. Otherwise, you're gonna fail. But I didn't have that at Catholic University. I don't know if that was something that just didn't happen at first, and now it's something they've implemented in college now, but it helped, yeah.
I guess with Nova, my experience with going into, like I said, the medical field, it was better to go to that campus and talk to the advisors there. They seemed to be really on point. They knew exactly what you needed. And what's nice is they have information sessions, which are now on YouTube, that you can watch, and it tells you specifically, these are the classes you need. These are the classes they recommend you take, and these are the classes that you will be taking in this course. So it really had a nice guideline. So you kind of knew what to expect and what you should complete.
Were there any difficulties in transferring your credits from your previous college experience to where you guys are now?
I think some of them didn't transfer, going from, I guess, semester-based to quarter-based. But overall, and also having taken biology, it was over 10 years, so having to retake that. Overall, it was a good experience, I think. It was fine, as long as you gave them those 3 weeks they needed, you're good.
So I know all three of you have children, and one of the things I think a lot of people are thinking about now is what kind of support services can universities offer to student parents? What have your experiences been with the level of support that your schools have offered when your schedules don't necessarily fit the tradition of what people figure college students would have to deal with when you have to take care of a sick child or just attend to just the day-to-day needs that your child needs?
I think for myself, it's been very difficult just being a student parent in college, non-traditional student. The path can be very unclear as to where you need to go and what you need to do in order to be successful. And I was fortunate enough to have a close relationship with my advisor and just be up to date with anything. For my situation, my wife, she's currently breastfeeding. We have a 3-month-old, and they're able to provide services, to coordinate scheduling for a breastfeeding area, a private room for her. So that's something that I've been able to just witness just with having our newborn here. And for myself as well, I believe just being up to date with the resources that are available to you whether it be supplemental resources, government resources. That's always a very important piece and key to a student's success. So that's something that I've really benefited from.
What about you guys?
I haven't really had to utilize any resources. I do know that they have a room available should the case arise, but I'm very fortunate. I have my family. My mom is here with us helping out so I can finish my school or my course. But honestly, I haven't been able to utilize any resources if there are.
Okay.
Yeah, me either. It's just if I have one of my kids home with a fever, they're next to me, my laptop is here, and you hustle, you get it done. Yeah.
Gotcha. So, I mean, having had, I feel like, a myriad of experience. You guys have been to four-year schools, community colleges, for-profit schools, all of these different iterations within higher education. What would you have liked to be different in your experience? What could have any of these schools along the way have done to make your transition easier or to make it so that you could get your degree faster?
For me, I think it's the academic advisor part. That is a necessity because for graduate retention, you need someone, especially when you're 18. I was 17. It's your first time with adulthood, and you just go. Get books, go to campus, figure out where to go, how to navigate. And that's hard the first time around if you don't have anybody will sit you down, it's on your side. This time around, I'm an adult, a real adult. So I can handle it myself, but it's also good, somebody to walk you through, somebody to just ask how's it going, even to congratulate your milestones. I think it makes you not just believe in yourself, but your school. And I think that's important. That's kind of the main thing. It's supposed to be a community, and it helps this time around. Yeah.
Myself, I'm transferring to George Mason University in the fall, so I've only been a witness to the community college experience. And I think the most important word in community college is not college, but the community portion. And that's something that I can definitely attest to. Just feeling the sense of community within the college. There are many groups and organizations that help supplement your success. And the only thing I really would have changed was having access to childcare on campus, just because it didn't hinder my success, but it would have made it a lot easier and maybe would have accelerated my progress. That's really the only thing I would have, I think, benefited from as far as having that extra resource on the campus.
I often wonder about costs and how transparent schools are, even high schools are, as you're embarking on a college career. What was your experience, or what was your understanding of how much it would cost for you to get a college degree?
I don't know. First time around, I didn't pay attention to anything.
Sounds
I
like
felt
me.
like I was a baby. And I feel like I was fortunate enough to have successful parents. So I think they just said, just go, apply to wherever you want. I wasn't somebody who applied for financial aid. I did this time around, and I did apply for scholarships this time around. But when I was younger, I had every opportunity. So I didn't have that problem at first, yeah.
When I first started out, I was very fortunate to have qualified for 2 scholarships, so that helped out the first semester. Yeah. But going into just when I started the community college, I did utilize the Montgomery GI Bill. I served in the U.S. Air Force Reserves, and so I was able to utilize that. That helped out. And I worked at that time, but I wasn't fortunate to have any help from my parents. And I feel like that's probably another reason why I took a break. We really focused on my husband finishing school first, and then, we had our first son, and I just was a stay-at-home mom, and I kind of really didn't know how we would be able to afford both of us going at the same time. So I just put my full support into him, and so when he was finally finished with his goals, I finally was able to decide what I wanted to do and pursue that.
As a first-generation American, the pathway through college was very unclear, especially the payment part. It was very intimidating with my family. The first time in 2009, as I mentioned, straight out of high school, the financial aid, the FAFSA portion was very intimidating just because there's very intricate information that you need to submit. But in 2014, when I wanted to get back in school, it was also confusing, but I was eligible to apply for financial aid. I was fortunate enough to have been accepted into a scholarship program based out in DC as well. That was able to provide me mentorship and financial support to attend college. And I was able to trot along the way and earn a couple more scholarships that were able to help me pay the cost of tuition, the parking pass, the textbooks, and everything else that comes between school and work and family as well. So,
I'm glad you mentioned the textbooks and the parking pass and all those other costs that, if you look at when schools break down their costs, not very many of them itemize at that level. And I'm wondering, were there any points where certain smaller costs surprised you or potentially could have derailed you as you were pursuing your studies beyond tuition or room and board or any of those standard costs?
So, as life has it, accidents happen, things happen. I've been riddled with car issues this past year. My wife and I, on both of our vehicles, and it was to the point where the cost just would have been unbearable as to help us continue going to school. And so we were fortunate enough to be in a community college which has all these other resources. And one of Northern Virginia Community College's resources is the Working Student Success Network, which they do help out students that that want to stay in school, but they're they're challenged with these hardships or obstacles like car issues or family issues. And they were able to provide me an emergency fund in order to get my car fixed, in order to keep going to school.
That's the same for Southern New Hampshire University. If you have a problem, you call. It could be textbooks, anything, and they have an emergency fund as well.
How did that compare to when you were at a four-year university?
Again, you were just lost. You were you were kind of on your own, and I'm sure that they've changed how. I can't say for sure, but I'm guessing it's had to have changed because I don't know how a lot of people are graduating. People have to be falling off, freshman, sophomore year, without that.
I wonder, as someone who is a member of the military, as a reservist, do you feel that the schools that you've been to were very welcoming of you and had support services to help for your specific needs? I've spoken to a lot of veterans who say that they feel like they're kind of adrift at a lot of schools because there's no one there who understands the culture for what they've come from and knows how to deal with them. What has your experience been like?
Currently at Nova, I really feel, that they have, the veteran service, liaison. They have offices there. And I visited them, and they were able to direct me to whatever resources I needed. So I feel like it's been they're very supportive. I think, I get emails all the time with news announcements about, military members and veterans. And, so far, I think it's been great.
I mean, beyond just kind of the academic advisement side, are there other things that you wish that, thought leaders as well as administration within higher education would consider when thinking about non-traditional students? And I use the air quotes because there's so many students who are not 18 to 21, who have families, who have situations that don't necessarily fit into our neat box of what we consider a college student to be. Where are we lacking as a society in being compassionate and thoughtful about how to help students like that?
Well, I feel it begins at the college level, even at a community college. You have to ask, what are we doing what can we do to improve? There's always that margin for improvement, and are we catering to the needs of students with disabilities? Are we catering to the needs of students who have been incarcerated or have an illness or have an unstable home? Where else can we reach out to these students and enable them to be successful and give them access to resources to be successful?
So I wonder, now that two of you are at the tail end of at least this first part of your journey for some folks, is your perception of the value of your degree the same as it was when you went in as it is now?
For me, I feel, because I went back to school for a second career.
Talk to us a little bit about that.
Okay, so I worked for 10 years in the entertainment industry as an assistant director for film and television. And after having my kids, I realized I can't work 12 to 18 hours on set. I can, but I don't want to. I don't want to miss their milestones. So going back to college is a necessity, but I know I can't stop at just a bachelor's. So I'm continuing to get my master's and probably my doctorate, because with a bachelor's, I can become an administrative assistant, sure, but I can't do much else with it without experience, without a lot of experience. So I have to continuously keep going. So yeah.
Or either.
I'll just share this. I still have one more year until I'm done with my program, but dental hygiene, I feel like, is such a great career. And right now, there was just an article out, at CNN, really praising how you can either get a 2-year or 4-year in this career field, and you can go anywhere, any state, and I definitely feel like the value of it is great. I'm already in the dental field as a dental assistant. I definitely think it's a great career field. I love this. I know I'm going to love this job once I start really working it. But I wanted to share that some of my classmates do have their 4-year degrees already, and they've had to reevaluate, and they're doing this because they feel more value in this degree at the community college than with their 4-year degree.
The value of an education means much more to me now than it did before. And I can say that, I took the long way, I guess. It took me 5 years to realize that, hitting the glass ceiling at my job. And my wife, she just earned her associate's degree. We're both walking on Mother's Day in a couple of days.
That's cute.
Thank you. Thank you. And I can absolutely bear witness to the fact that she just landed a job with Fairfax County government, the school program, because of her associate's degree. So I do know there is a direct correlation between obtaining that degree and being successful as far as earning a better paying job and being financially empowered. And for myself as well, I do see the opportunities opening up. Both my wife and I are going to be the first in our families each to earn a college degree. So it's a major impact on our family.
I think one of the findings in the study that I thought was interesting is looking at college education as a societal good. As at this point of your career where you are pursuing degrees or about to complete one, how do you see your position as a benefit to the rest of the society, what you've been able to accomplish and how it'll play out for the rest of the world?
I think it has an immediate impact on my kids, my children. And this is something that I took from a colleague of mine, is that what I'm doing now will have a direct impact on my children and future generations as well. So just changing that cultural, the academic and my culture where my family comes from, where they didn't have access to college or a higher education, and I'm able to do that now here. It will have a positive impact on my children.
Yeah, I can already see it. My children are already talking about it. Are you doing homework? They sit and do their homework with me. We're both writing papers on Dr. Seuss, except for mine's 20 pages. But So I do think individually, for my individual self, it's great for my family. But I mean, don't we want a smarter society? Don't we want everybody to be smarter? Because we make better choices collectively. So I think that college education is for everyone.
What made each of you select the schools that you ultimately ended up at? What was it about those colleges, universities, community colleges that was attractive to you, and has it lived up to what your expectations?
Yeah, like I said, I applied to a bunch of schools, and I got into, I would say, half of the schools that I applied to. I think it was just talking, touring, that kind of thing. And a lot of the for-profit schools ended up acting like telemarketers, calling constantly, emailing constantly, you just have to spam that. So those were out of, no question, I'm not going there. So I think it just was, if they had the program that I wanted, you can look up the faculty, what would they bring to you, like professors, instructors, the deans, that kind of thing. So you kind of evaluate a lot of things now. Yeah.
Has it lived up to your expectations?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And I guess how much did the flexibility of the courses and timing play into your decision to go with Southern New Hampshire?
Well, for me, online. Okay. And I'll attest that online is actually a lot of work. They're like, since you're at home, here you go, write 8 papers. Yeah, so for me, it's extremely flexible. As far as you're not attending a certain course at 10 to 11, you can go in it whenever you can get into it. So it worked out for me, because with 3 kids under 8, it's a lot. Yeah.
Selection process for you.
Selection process. I actually worked with several dental hygienists who went through this program.
Okay.
I've worked with several of them, and they could not talk enough about how great of a program it is. And I know a lot of dental offices that they do look at the students who graduate from this program and in high regard. And I actually applied previously, and I wasn't accepted the first time. So I applied. I took more classes to make myself more applicable, and I got in the second time. But I mean, it's just a lot of people know about this program. It's well respected, and and it has lived up to my expectations. The coursework, everything. It's very intense. A lot to get done in 2 years, and even where I am, I'm impressed with how far we've come as a class, and it's just great. And I think I really chose a great school and a great program.
Yeah. Why Nova?
The most important question for me before I even jumped back into school was, is it possible? And that's the barrier that a lot of people face when they're making that decision, is it possible?
Yeah.
And Nova was just the most ideal for my situation and my family situation. As you know, I'm sure they've had to also deal with dropping off their kids at the bus stop, being aware of their children's needs as well as their family's needs. My wife as well, her situation, it definitely would have worked out for her. Her mom passed away when she was 15. Her father passed away just before her high school graduation. She really didn't have any of that support that would have made it possible for her to be successful in college. And it did have the support groups and the organizations around it in order to enable us to succeed. So that's why, because it's ideal for our situation, and we knew it would have been possible with them.
Okay. I mean, having gone through this process, are there certain things that you wish you had done differently throughout your college experience, or things that you would advise others against or advise them to consider doing?
I would say, I would recommend starting out at a community college.
Okay.
I really do. Location is great. There's so many different locations for Nova, and if you're in Northern Virginia, they have such a wide variety of courses, and I mean, get a feel, try different classes. It's affordable. See what you like before you decide to really jump in and invest even more money and more time into what could be, the rest of your life, you know.
I feel like everybody's situation is different, and maybe that's the problem, is there's no one to talk to before you jump in, because like she said, it depends. If you go to a 4-year college, you could end up with $30,000 a year in educational debt. So, and then you're a baby, or even if you're older, you don't really know what you want to do yet. You should, like you said, start small and take as many courses as you can to figure it out, get a feel.
Myself would just be to give everything a chance, just as they mentioned here now, and don't give up, because at the end, doubt kills more dreams than failure ever did.
So we have time for a little bit of audience questions. Feel free to ask our amazing panel questions about their experience.
First, I want to thank all of you guys. You're very inspiring. But I also have a question in terms of we're talking about higher ed and the way higher education can better serve students. But couldn't we go back to high school and see how that prepared you or didn't prepare you for seeking out the kind of support you needed, or having courses that made you more prepared for college?
I agree. I had a high school counselor, but if you went, they would help you fill out your application, work on your essays, but it wasn't guidance about college, about what you would be facing. And I think that, yes, you're right. It should happen a lot earlier. I even think we could do workshops. There should be things that you're doing that have community colleges versus campus, like on campus, 4-year colleges. There should be a lot more information that you get in high school.
I agree. Oh, I was just going to say, what I've noticed here in Virginia, there are, dental assisting courses. There's all sorts of these workshops, and I wish I had that when I was in school. So I definitely think that that's a great benefit in the area. I don't know if it's specific to, I guess, the DMV area, but I think that that would definitely help. Like her, I did not have real guidance, and I felt like it was my counselor that really kind of pushed me to do the Cal State, the 4-year, when I really didn't feel like I was ready. And I think that would be a benefit to have that guidance.
So you said reaching back into the high schools and going back in there, and that's interesting because I was in high school, junior and senior year, and I had a pathways counselor, which essentially is a counselor that helps you transition into college. And for me, it wasn't the fact that the resources lacked, it was the fact that my effort wasn't there. I wasn't motivated at the time. And so I think the real question is, how do we find those individual students, and how do we motivate them and let them know that there is value in college? And that's something that would have helped me and aided me earlier on.
Susan Sclafani. I wish all of you were available to talk with high school students, because your experiences really would inform them. But what about career and technical education programs in high school? They're designed to give you an idea about possible careers, some that require licensing or certificates, others that require 4-year degrees. Did any of you have any experience with that would have enabled you to learn more, see more about what options were available?
In my high school, there was the computer classes where we learned, the basic Microsoft applications, and it was a little certificate, but I didn't end up utilizing it. I did work on computers in the Air Force, but it wasn't anything that really helped me specifically, but I feel like it at least helped me be comfortable with those applications.
Interesting enough, you said to go and speak to high school students. That's actually what my wife and I do. We do volunteer at time to speak at alternative high schools, especially teen parents, young parents, to motivate them to go to college and realize that there is value in college, in a college education. But in my high school, we actually had this part of the school called the Academy, which does offer that technical training like HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, graphic designs, and AutoCAD design. So those programs, for me, they were available.
Yeah, I didn't have those programs. I went to Oxon Hill High School in Maryland, and we had a science and tech program, a magnet program, and then just high school for the people who lived in the area. And so the science and tech, you were in that program if you had the best grades. So it didn't necessarily mean you wanted to have that as a career. I did end up as an architectural student. I didn't stay there though. But we didn't really have any career stuff. There was no guidance really. It was just kind of putting you in different blocks and then putting you all together. So, yeah.
Any other?
Thank you all so much. One of the questions that I wanted to ask that I don't know that has come up quite directly is the course placement process when you were first kind of going into college. I'm wondering, one of the big struggles that a lot of non-traditional students face going back to school is course placement and remediation. And I'm wondering if you had any experiences with having to take tests to place into math courses or English courses and what that was like for you all.
First time around, worst experience ever. Taking tests to place in math, for instance, and then ending up in calculus 4, differential equations at 7 in the morning, and physics at 8, and it was horrible, like the worst situation ever. And then I'm sure maybe I had an advisor, but no one was there to help me, ask me, or to even say, well, let's get you to a tutor. There was nothing. So yeah, it was rough at the first time around. And someone should say, no classes at 7 and 8. Especially math, especially physics, but yeah.
I did have to take a placement course coming to Nova, even as a transfer student. But I feel, I don't know, I kind of reached out to other students, kind of found out, like the hygienist, what did you take, So I feel like kind of word of mouth from other students was beneficial also, but I didn't reach out to academics. I don't know if that answers your question.
For myself, I did have to, after 5 years, you have to take some placement tests, English, math, you have to. And so in the math placement test, I think that's where I was placed in remedial courses, just to be able to start at the college level. So I was there in those courses for about a year. They did provide me with the education that I needed to be successful. And this past semester, I just passed my pre-calc and applied calculus classes now. So it is a bit of an obstacle. But you have to be willing to reach out to the resources that you need, because I did seek out tutoring services from the campus and from my scholarship program, and I was able to succeed because of that. Welcome.
Hi, I'm currently an undergrad at GW, so feeling a lot of the same things you guys are feeling. And one thing that I know GW really tries to do with its students is have the resources available, but not hold your hand. So they say, when you first come to campus, the resources are here, but you have to come to us and you have to come find them. So I want to ask you guys how you think the universities can do a better job of getting those resources out to students with advising and things like that, or if it's more on the students to go and actively seek those out.
We're adults, so I do think that you should be able to go on your own. I don't believe in hand-holding, but you need to know that it exists. And I feel like now you have the internet, and every school has a website and a college portal, like a student portal. there's ways to get it out there, but you have to know it exists. If you don't, then you're kind of just failing. And this time around, with my school now, you know of every resource, peer tutors, peer leaders. I mean, there's a million things, graduates, tutors. You have everything now. Academic advisor. I mean, when I sign on to my student portal, her face is right there, and any messages. I mean, you can't miss it. You can't say, well, I don't have an academic advisor. No. So I mean, I think that you just need you need access to it. If it's not there, then yeah, I don't see students, succeeding or loving their experience at school.
Hi, thank you all. Just a quick question back to the high school preparation for college. Did you get any information about alternatives alternatives to college for your future? What is communicated to you? Is college the one way and work the other, or are there any alternatives that you get to choose from?
I can share my experience becoming like a dental assistant. So there are adult community education courses in Virginia, ACE, and that is available also. Like, I was able to get a certificate. Whereas dental assisting, they do have programs, year-long programs. So that was kind of a career. I don't know if I'm explaining this correctly, but through the adult community education, which was $2,000 versus, a year-long program where that was maybe $20,000, it's the same, you're gonna get the same job, So I feel like that is another avenue outside of the community college program. So there are that avenue for those who don't want to. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's my experience.
I actually wasn't exposed to any other an alternative to college. So it was either college or good luck after high school, pretty much, which that's essentially what happened. Good luck after high school. Now they come begging back to college. And so it's something that I think it would be very beneficial for high schools to have. Like, if you're not pursuing a college route, what interests you? What do you want to do? It's important to be financially empowered at this point forward. And so I think it would be very important.
How much shopping did either or any of you do when you were making your college choice decision? How many schools did you look at? What kind of data did you look at? What kind of third-party information did you leverage in making your choices?
First time around, I think I applied to 15 schools, a lot. Yeah, so, and then I went with my mom and my grandmother. We visited out-of-state colleges. We pretty much went everywhere. So I'm not gonna go with my first time around. My second time around, I was a little bit more focused. And with 3 kids, I had to look at on-campus versus online, what those programs were, again, what the faculty were, and I did the same thing for my master's when I applied again to look at who was teaching what, because that to me is more important. I want to actually get something from my degree. So I feel like when you do apply, you really need to shop. You need to look at everything. It's important, yeah.
I guess for dental hygiene, you could go to the 4-year at VCU. There's Howard. There's another school, Fortis. And I definitely looked at the stats. What would it take to get into those schools, and also those other hygienists who have been there, and what employers, were they happy with their work, with the outcome, I guess, of those programs. And Nova just had it for me.
To be honest, I didn't do much shopping. I am at Northern Virginia Community College, but transferring to George Mason University, I honestly didn't do much shopping just because I was looking at the tuition rates, and it really does deter you from even considering applying to the school. And then there's the application fees that you don't know if you're just going to waste. Or so I chose George Mason because it is ideal for my situation. I'm located out here. It's convenient for me to commute back and forth. I don't have to consider being on campus and that expense as well. So that's something that it just kind of narrowed down my search, just what's ideal for my situation right now.
Hi, I just wanted to ask if any of you folks have worked with the Career Services Center at your schools, and if you felt like your schools have done a good job of preparing you for the immediate transition out of school and into the workforce in terms of, here's how to have a successful job search, or was it more just along the lines of, oh, here's how to write a resume, good luck out there?
For me, my career advisor, it's kind of like a 5-step process. So the first time around, I am assigned to someone who is specific to my major. So she only focuses on English majors. And then, yes, she does do resume. We also do mock interviews. She helps me with search engines. We go through all the search engines, keywords, everything. Like it's a great process, and she helped. It's a really good program, yeah.
At the end of our program, next in 2 semesters, I think it's right before we graduate, there is a portion where we focus on like our portfolios. We do interviews, so they kind of help guide us, and we do have maybe reps from different companies, dental companies, that come, so that they do prepare us.
So I am a work-study student for my college, and I was fortunate enough to actually literally work in the career services side of things. So I'm going to try to be as non-biased as possible here. We do an amazing job. As a student, though, I did benefit from, as she mentioned, mock interviews. We do have a website that specifically caters to our students, employers looking for community college students, because they know that they need that flexibility. They provide resume reviews. They have internship and jobs website, a lot of tips and tricks for interview skills, and we do have counselors available for that, for their case, per se.
We have time for one more question. Go ahead.
Thank you so much again for coming. I am blessed in that I got to talk to them all on the phone ahead of time, so I got to hear their stories, but you guys are truly an inspiration. So as somebody who works in federal policy and, am seated here in Washington, D.C., if you could go to like your representative, or if you went to the Hill, what would you want them to know about you as students and students like you? And maybe like, if there was an ask, what would that ask be?
That is a tough question. I guess it doesn't pertain specifically to me, but I wish there was a better government assistance so that more people could obtain a degree. Because I don't think that schools should just be based on socioeconomics. We get to go to high school and then you're done, but you can't. When I look at, because I just was with my career advisor, and we go through all of, the job search, and you're looking, and people want a degree to answer a multi-line phone. When we're a generation with cell phones, we can walk, talk, search. So why do you need a degree for that? And so if you do want a degree, if the degree equals commitment or whatever that is, then why can't we open up education to more people?
I would probably go up and ask Capitol Hill I want to be a contributing member to society. How can you help me have access to these resources to make it possible for myself and my family to succeed.
Guys, thank you so much for joining us. I found all of your answers really enlightening and very helpful. Please give us a hand. All right, guys, please stick around for our next panel, which will be starting now as we get off the stage.
Deborah.
Oh.
Rob Neighbors.
Pleasure, Deborah.
Nice to meet you.
Same here. Sharing the stage here. Oh my gosh, there was a. Nobody leave the room.
Follow,
It's hard
tell me
to
what to do, and we're good to go. Right, right.
This is a very august group that I've managed to winnow my way into, although following students is a bad idea.
You know, can we just say what they said?
Yes. Fantastic. Great.
They're not kidding. They do run a tight ship.
They do run a.
Yeah. So that's helpful because, you know, we want to be respectful too. I know we got a series of questions. So.
No,
Okay.
it's.
Gosh, we don't even garner.
All right, everyone. I know people tried to escape the room for coffee. Make your way back now. I'm going to give it about one more minute, but we're really excited to get started with the next panel, and I'm going to... Oh my gosh. I feel like this is like a school classroom. Everybody's just so excited about the results of our survey. Yeah, everybody stop playing with the data tool. I know it's exciting. Okay. Now we're going to talk about policy. We're going to turn it over to the amazing panel. We have Rob Neighbors from the Gates Foundation, Deb Santiago from Excellencia in Education, Scott Rawls from Nova Community College, the president, and Cheryl Oldham from U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and Jose Luis Cruz from CUNY-Lehman. So I'm going to hand it over.
Well, the first thing I'd like to do is recognize the last panel. It is never easy to talk in front of a large group, but I think the students that you just heard from just did an amazing job. So if you could recognize all of them, I would really appreciate that. We have the challenge of following amazing, inspirational students, so good luck to all of you. I'd also like to thank New America for hosting this event and the research that we're here to talk about today. The New America research, it indicates a number of very important things. The two things that really stood out to me is that, one, Americans really do believe that there is a tremendous amount of potential in our higher education system. But two, they believe that the higher education system is falling far short of that potential. One of the particular numbers that jumped out to me was that only 1 in 4 believe that our education system is doing fine. That's not terribly surprising when you look at some of the things that we see every day. When you have a sizable gap between the college graduation rates of white and black students, of white students and Hispanic students, when half of all students who begin their college career don't make it to graduation, when low-income students are much less likely than high-income students to have a degree by the age of 24. It's this gap between the expectations of what education should be producing and what's actually happening that's underlying a lot of what we are seeing in the data that New America brought forward. At its best, higher education can be an engine for economic growth, economic mobility, and improving the lives of people everywhere. And that's really what we need to strive for, and that's in part why we're here today. How do we get to a place where students can start and finish an affordable, high-quality education? What's standing in the way? What role do institutions play? What role does the state and federal government play? And what can other stakeholders do to improve this situation? These are the big questions that, in my mind, sort of jump out from the survey results. And we are very fortunate to have an incredibly experienced, knowledgeable panel here today to start to drill down on some of these questions. So we have the president of CUNY's Lehman College in the Bronx, Dr. Jose Luis Cruz. We have the vice president of education policy at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Cheryl Oldham. We have the president of my hometown school, Northern Virginia Community College, Scott Rawls. And we have the co-founder, COO, and vice president for policy at Excellencia in Education, Deb Santiago. So thank you for joining me today. What I'd really like to do is to start with the panel that we just saw. I think one of the things that jumps out to me is that panel does not look like the traditional view of what a college student looks like. These were not people who came directly from high school. This was not a group of folks who were spending a lot of time on Ivy-covered college campuses, and this was not a group of people that had the ability to go to school full time. How do these experiences compare to your experience in looking at what the new college student of America looks like, and what does that mean for how we need to think about higher education? Deb, if we could start with you.
Sure. You know, it was great to see that panel because I think they are representative of our students, and I wouldn't even say they're the new students. We've seen that profile for quite a while. I think in public policy, we're inclined to think of the traditional student as that 18-year-old that goes straight from high school to college, lives on campus, and finishes in 4 years. But that's less than 20% of students today. The majority of students look like our panel and have the stories and life experiences of our panel. You know, they stop out, return, they go part-time, they go to community colleges, they're transferring, they're swirling. I think paying attention to how students are adapting to our current structure in higher ed and figuring out how we can help them is our commitment, and should be all of our commitment, to make sure they're successful as those on the panel.
I'll agree with Deb. I don't think they're the new students, but I think too often when we look at higher ed, they're the hidden students. And just to use an example, recently I noted that our state, my state, Virginia, was ranked as having by one ranking as having the #1 system of higher education in the country. And I tweeted that out. I was proud of that. But then I looked and saw that it didn't include my institution because it was only 4-year school. So, you know, Lindsay and Ariel's experience was not included. When they left out my school, they left out 31% of all the Hispanic Latino college students in the state because they go to our institutions. So I think a lot of it is not about new students, but about that perspective of higher education that is much broader and is really what most Americans experience as higher education.
I think too what we heard from them is, especially when you think about the majority of students going to college now, is they're going because they want a job, right? They want economic security, they want to advance their position, they want to find that thing that is going to help their family and help them to grow personally. So it's less about, it's just interesting to me, and I think sort of instructive to think about that really is a core purpose of post-secondary education, right? Is not just global thinkers and are we good citizens, which is also really important, but what are we doing to help students of all ages to be successful in that transition into employment?
I think what's interesting is that only those that are accustomed to talking about higher ed from the perspective of Research One elite institutions are surprised when they see the type of panel that we had here today.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is that our public 2-year and 4-year schools across the country, these are the students we serve. And these are the schools that are actually providing the tools and the resources for the new America to be able to succeed. So at Lehman College, I'm proud to be in the Bronx, in New York City. We have about 13,000 students that are in undergraduate and graduate programs, and we also serve another 13,000 in workforce development. And what you will see is that 50% of our students have a household income of less than $30,000. That the median age of our students is 27. And so 80% of them are students of color. 90 different languages are spoken at their homes. So it's not a surprise to those of us that are in the 2-year and 4-year public sector, and we would very much hope that the policy perspective and the practices that would come out of Washington and our state houses would recognize that and make the investments needed so that we can make this new America greater.
And I would say, isn't that part of our challenge, though, is that we are not measuring for these kinds of students either, right? I mean, both of you are at institutions that we're all looking at the graduation rate, which doesn't include these post-traditional students, right? Right.
What would you need to do in order to measure these students? What is the next step that we have to take?
Yeah, I'll start, but I think we all think about this a lot because of the students we have, right? Better data, right?
Better data.
I think it's better data, but it's also more accurate data, right? So if you have graduation rates which are only first-time, full-time freshmen completing within 150% time, you've excluded the majority of students who are like those that look at this panel, who were adults stopped out, returned, transferred from a 4-year institution to a 2-year institution. None of our graduation rate doesn't capture any of those students. So it's certainly, as Cheryl said, better data, but it's also, are we using any data to capture that? And when we look at institutions, are we paying attention to who they're really serving and measuring that? Because we've learned we measure what we value, and we could be sending messages we don't value the very students that we need to get educated for our workforce.
I would just echo that to say, not to make sort of K through 12 comparisons, because I know higher ed
really doesn't like that, but I mean, we were there, 10, 15 years ago, 15, I guess, plus years ago, where we weren't measuring, as you said, we value what we measure what we value. We weren't necessarily doing that in K through 12, and there's an ability to sort of hide people, right, when we don't have attention paid. And I think that can be said in higher ed as well. If we don't know how minority students are doing, disadvantaged students are doing, then how can we expect, that people will provide the attention and support and that's necessary and needed?
I think we also have to step back and say, what is success? A lot of times we think within an institutional framework. And so what is success? For me, most of our students who are coming to us are hopefully trying to get there, or they're coming to us with a goal of trying to get a bachelor's degree. And since most of our students will transfer without an associate's degree, what I care about is 6 years later, do they have a bachelor's degree? We need to pay attention to that. For students like Lindsay and others who are coming because their goal is to get to the workforce, it's not just getting a job, but within a period of time, are they making above 60,000, which is the middle class threshold? So I think we have to step back and say, what is success over time? Because the way we traditionally look at college success is very much within a specific institutional framework, completing at that college and moving forward, and that's really limiting when you look at what is real success.
Jose, Scott, given what Scott has just said, how has that perspective changed the way you are running your institutions? How does that perspective sort of filter into the way that you are running your schools right now?
So at Lehman College, one of the things that we have committed to just in the past couple of months is that what we've come to realize is that to really advance our mission, we have to really step it up. So just recently, the Quality of Opportunity Project named Lehman College as number 4 in the nation for mobility rate. We have traditionally been shown to propel more students from the lower income brackets to the middle class and beyond than most public institutions across the country. And so we saw that and we felt very proud about that. But then if you go back into the archives of the Equality Opportunity Project, you will find that the students, that the Bronx, the place that we serve, is among the worst counties in the country in terms of the possibility that a young person in the lowest income brackets could actually have upward mobility. So there's a lot of inequality there. So we decided that we really needed to step things up, and what that has translated to is a very concrete goal of doubling the number of high-quality degrees and credentials that we produce by the year 2030. So we want to do 90,000 degrees and credentials by 2030. That's double what we would do if we just kept in steady state. And what that is forcing us to do is rethink, given the limitations that we have financially, how do we restructure our efforts and even the way we go about measuring our success so that we accomplish that. So for example, do we need to continue to be proud about the fact that 50% of our students are first generation? Or should we do more about educating the parents of the kids that are currently in K-12 so that they can then get to a better place financially and also model to their students that college is a possibility and worth pursuing? So it's really changing the way we think about how we produce our work. It's not only about graduation rates or enrollment levels, it's also about the type of programs and services that we provide to all of the people in the Bronx. So hopefully we can contribute to higher educational attainment.
I would say there are two ways. Just like Jose, I think at our institution, we think about very deliberately as a core focus is socioeconomic mobility. I mean, that is the purpose of our college. We do that through education. We talk very deliberately about the American dream and our role in that regard and what that means. And so we think in that term, and that's why we think in terms of keeping costs down, but keeping resources where we can to support students to move forward in that regard. So I think that influences our thinking. I think another way of our thinking, Ariel used the term pathways. I mean, we have certain students that are pathway students, but we think in the context of pathways. We fit, our students are on a pathway that just goes through Nova. It is not just Nova. So We reach out into the public schools with our counselors to pull students in who may not have a pathway through what we call our Pathways program. But we also look very deliberately in terms of how our students move forward to our partners, our great partner like George Mason, where we have a new relationship, but it's just an expansion on an existing relationship because our students' pathway like ours will flow through George Mason. So, you know, it's a notion of looking at what we like to say with our George Mason partner, inclusive excellence, not exclusive selectivity, but inclusive excellence. And I think that ties back to the socioeconomic mobility purpose of institutions like ours.
One of the things that I find interesting is how often this community, the country, comes together to talk about the state of education. And one of the things that, as I was preparing for this, Cheryl, you were the executive director of the Spellings Commission on Higher Ed back in 2006, and there was a quote that I pulled out from the report. It's good. A lack of clear, reliable information about the cost and quality of post-secondary institutions, along with a remarkable absence of accountability mechanisms to ensure that colleges succeed in education and educating students today. This was one of the lines that drew a lot of attention. And it's not dissimilar to some of the issues that we're continuing to talk about today. I think as we try to move forward and improve the state of education, I think one of the things that people are looking for is evidence that there has been some progress over time. And I was hoping the panel could address this issue. What progress have we made in terms of progress in post-secondary education?
I think significant, although not enough. From, I guess it was 11 years ago since the report was released, and I think we're definitely having not just a conversation, but action related to better data, transparency, a focus on outcomes that didn't exist back then, or maybe existed in smaller pockets. I don't want to suggest that nobody was doing that or focusing on that back in 2005, 2006, but I think there's definitely been an advancement in that. And I think, you know, from my perspective, that transparency, that focus on outcomes, better data, all of that, that is just serves to improve the system as a whole and benefits, you know, everybody, but particularly the students in the system.
Yeah, I think the challenge is those of us who kind of are insiders in higher ed, we know when we look at the raw numbers that it looks better. I was struck in the survey at New America that that's not the perception of the broader polis, that we're doing well. In fact, that we aren't, and we need to do a lot better. And so it's heartening when you hear things like President Cruz saying, you know, we're committing ourselves to double where we are, we're accelerating. And that's significant. I mean, at Excelencia, our mission is to accelerate student success, not just increase it, because we're looking at equity gaps and saying, you know, increasing is great, but if we're going to close gaps, we've got to accelerate, and that means doing more and being explicit and being intentional. And I think that's a conversation we're not having enough externally. So when you hear a survey like this saying they believe in higher ed, but not that the institutions are doing well enough, I mean, they don't hear stories like Nova and Lehman, but they also aren't hearing organizations, entities committed to acceleration. And we need to do right by students by focusing on what we can do to accelerate, not just increase.
I think overall with higher ed, we know we have over years, over decades, we've made great progress in terms of access, but we still have much greater progress to make in terms of ultimate completion. Our graduation lines at this time of year should be longer given the registration lines we have in August, and that's something that is not easily solved, but something we have to keep focus on and be very deliberate about because access is one part of success, but we have progress towards completion, and actually completion, we have to be very diligent about staying focused on that.
What are the main barriers to accelerating that progress that we're all talking about?
Well, I'll jump out. There are the barriers.
So many.
There are the barriers that we put in the way. You know, so I was heartened to hear Ariel and Lindsay. In fact, I'm reluctant to speak because I can only make us look worse from this point forward. But I do know there are students who do struggle to find their advisors. That's not every student's experience, and so how do we? That's something that we're trying to do, is make sure that every student has that kind of experience. And so, making sure that students know that every step forward is a step forward. What is that path? And then having the advising and those types of supports. We try to take those barriers out. I think one of the things we struggle with is something Ariel brought up, is those barriers that we can't control. A lot of times our students, it's not the challenge of getting into our college, but staying in our college. And so as he described, a lot of times they're a carburetor away from dropping out. And so it's this issue of how do we have, so we do have a program, as he pointed out, but it is not big enough or systemic enough to be able to reach all those students who have a carburetor issue. Or a good example is on-site daycare at a college like ours, or those types of things. So I worry a lot about the things that we do that create barriers, but then there are the things that are the life things that get away, and how do we address those? And that's something that keeps me up at night.
I think that's the case. And there's so much conversation about the challenge of affordability. And I think it was a good point Danielle raised. It's not just tuition and fees, right? It's paying for that tank of gas to get you to and from. It's as clear as, can I find a parking space where I'm going so I can get to my class on time and get to work on time? And we often don't think in ways that are as pragmatic as you heard our panel talk. And how, from an institutional perspective, do we support students where they're at, rather than trying to force them to be, to fit the mold that we think they should be fitting in. And I think there's that tension about the student's responsibilities, the institutional role. There are barriers in each of them, and our focus is we can do a great job analyzing them. What are we doing to break down those barriers or help students jump over them or create the ladder that they can climb over it? That to me is the challenge, because I felt like I could name 20 barriers right now, depending on the post-traditional profile. And if we stop at the barrier identification and don't figure that out, I think that's where we fail our students, and we have to do a better job of that.
And I would say also that there are many barriers, but from a structural perspective, what we're seeing particularly in the 2-year and 4-year regional colleges and university sector, is that the needs of our students, the demands that they have in order for us to be able to serve them well, translate into increased operational costs, that when combined with reductions in state investments, cause even well-meaning campus communities difficulty in terms of how to manage that. So how has state disinvestment translated in the past several years to the current reality in 2-year and 4-year institutions? Well, it has led to a decrease in the percentage or the number of full-time faculty that we have available, that is available on campus full-time to provide not only teaching but also guidance to the students. It has increased reliance on part-time faculty that are not on campus as much. It has increased the number of students that we need to serve in a particular class. So the student-faculty ratios have been affected. It has forced us to defer maintenance in our buildings because we need to put those monies toward emergency funds and other areas. It has forced us to delay updating our technology. So we're not providing the best tools for the education. And I could go on and on. So it's going to the myth and reality of the survey that was put out, this sort of understanding that states and the federal government is investing more and more in higher ed, and that's really not the case. Then how is it that if we realize that's not the case, we would be surprised that we're having more difficulty now, even with the gains we've made in recent years, meeting the demands of the students that we are now serving?
And I would just, I guess, close this one question with a comment from sort of the employer community and maybe barriers that we put in place, right? I mean, we, employers, the business community certainly has a major role to play in partnership and making sure that it is clear and understood what are the credentials, what are the competencies, what are the credential requirements, what are we looking for, so that institutions aren't flying blind, students aren't as well, and that we're trying to do this at the chamber to really think about how do we provide support to employers so that it isn't just the knee-jerk, I've got to have a bachelor's degree, I'm up-credentialing everything, because it's a sorting mechanism for me, right? It's supposed to mean something. I'm supposed to be able to say you have a bachelor's degree and you're going to come to me and you're going to have a level of skill and expertise and knowledge that's going to be what I need. And we hear this all the time. That's not quite happening all the time. So we need to do a better job. And so we're trying to do that at the chamber to sort of say, here are some strategies, some resources for the employer community to get better and more sophisticated about that, so that we maybe can get a handle on this up-credentialing piece, and we can be clearer and more transparent about what our needs are.
If we could stay on that point just for a second, I think that from what we heard from the last panel, the connection between education and employment is increasingly critical as we think about it. And one of the things that is occasionally somewhat jarring is you see that employers are struggling to fill positions, but there's a mismatch between the positions that they are attempting to fill and the skill sets that our new students have. How do we address that issue as a community?
We would all be really, really wealthy if we had figured that out. I think there's just so many factors, right? We're struggling with this and thinking about this all the time at the chamber, and how do we, what role can we play as the employer community to try to fix this? And it's some of what I just talked about in terms of our talent pipeline management initiative, with really trying to help employers sort of get in the driver's seat of a lot of these conversations, so that when we are talking about, we talk about workforce development and job training, and we sort of talk about the workforce system as kind of separate from higher ed, and higher ed's like the biggest workforce system we have in this country. The money in higher ed is, outpaces anything in our workforce development system, but we sort of separate these things. So we're trying to, think about that in a different way, and really, the changing economy, and we all sort of have to be much more nimble and able to sort of manage that risk of what is my future going to look like? Is my job going to be here in 5 years? Is it going to be here in 10 years? And what is the employer responsibility there? What is the government responsibility there? What is the individual responsibility there when we're talking about automation and new technologies and even trade and other things? And so that's a whole, that's like future conversation, but I think it's really relevant for what are we doing in higher ed, what are we doing in K through 12 to make sure that we're really preparing people for the economy that is here and the economy that is, just going to continue to change fast and furious.
I think the students did a great job of talking about the importance of advising, to know a system that's so complicated and a structure. And I was thinking, what if we did that for our employers as well as our institutions? We don't know. And just like our students don't know, the low-income first-gen students, why would we expect the employers or the institutions when it's also moving so fast for them as it is for our students? And I have this the name of a publication in my head, kind of framing, not blaming kind of a thing. Like, the business isn't doing the right work, or institutions aren't doing it, or the student isn't doing right. And it would be great if we went past the pointing fingers and come up with a structure. Like, employers want good employees. Okay, let's agree to that. Students want a quality education that will get them employment and civic leadership. Right? And if we could just start from that premise, could we look at things differently than we currently are, which is, one system or approach isn't doing the right job.
Well, and I think I just want to say one thing that I had meant to say is, not to beat a dead horse around data, but we know what jobs are, at least now, right? Like what jobs are going unfilled, what industries are growing, and by and large, people don't really leave, as much as we're a mobile society, people don't leave that far from their area, right? So why aren't we able to, and we're doing this again, with another initiative we have, Launch My Career with Strata and AIR and Gallup, where and we're only in a handful of states because we're only in those states that have the ability to have that really good outcome data. But why can't we, at the high school level and for returning adults, why can't we give them that information that says, okay, here are the hot jobs in your area, here are the skills that you need, and oh, by the way, here are some institutions that can get you there. So you may not know exactly what you want to study when you're in high school, but I could give you an idea of maybe what jobs are available, and it might get you thinking, it might help you to have some focus. Oh, and it also might help you to think, you know what, I could go to Nova, and they've got a great program with great outcomes. I can transfer, and I don't have to go to the elite 4-year institution and get myself in a ton of debt. Like, there's that really important, and I know a lot of people have a lot of tools out there, but like, how do we make sure we can get those into the hands of folks? I mean, I think that was a little bit of talked about by the student panel, is just not, word of mouth, and which is all very important too, but I think some real hard, outcome data is useful as well.
I think there's a reason why institutions like ours are focused on workforce development. It's not just for workforce development's sake, but it goes back to that socioeconomic mobility focus, that if you're trying to accomplish that, then what you're trying to do is connect to those opportunities, and that's where programs that are labeled workforce development come into play. I think for us to be successful at that, one is we have to use data, and the good news for us is that we have new types of data now. We're not just dependent on how many jobs are out there, looking at that, but looking at how many vacancies are out there, and so that gives us information as well as gives our students information, so it's about how we use that and how we get that in front of our students. We also have to be very diligent as institutions to pressure test data. That means interacting with those employers, and when we have our ideas, some of those are crazy pie in the sky, and some of those are on target, and we have to know what's on target, and because that helps our students make that connection. Our students are savvy, though, because they look and they try, they do everything they can to figure this out. And I'll just give you a phenomenon that's happened at Nova within 3 years. I mean, if you look at our region, our 4-county region, we now can tell that last year we had 17% of all the cybersecurity vacancies in the country within the region that our college serves. We have a program that's grown from 50 students in cybersecurity to 1,400 in 3 years. Now, to do that, though, that puts tremendous challenges on us. It means acquiring new facilities, renovating facilities, getting faculty, particularly adjunct talent, in fact, but other faculty. How do we do that? And so you have to be nimble in doing that. But then we have certain challenges, and I would say that different institutions face different challenges. We face, we're on the good side of the jobs part, but we have the challenge of we have lots of jobs in our area that need people. And then you look at other parts of the country, and they have people who need jobs. And the challenges are different, and so we have to think in the context of the regions in which we serve, but that's why the connections are so important between the employer community and the educational community, particularly for institutions like ours that are in the socioeconomic mobility end of it.
And I agree, it's similar to Nova. In the case of Lehman College, those connections with the employers, not just the data, but the actual conversation with them is really helpful in the way that we not only work with our workforce development certificate programs, but also with our undergraduate degrees, computer science being one good example. I would just add another important partner is unions. So we found at Lehman College that one of our better ways to calibrate how our programs need to move in different directions to accommodate the needs of our potential students and the community is to work with, for example, the 1199 SEIU union, and they have funds that are available so that they can help cover the cost of upgrading the skills of their union members. And they come to us and they say, we have identified that if you put together this particular program that will develop these skills for our union members, they will be able to go upgrade their job from a $15 an hour job to a $25 an hour job. And we work together to put that program in place. They help cover the cost, and everybody's happy afterwards. So it's looking at the data and having the conversations and creating those partnerships to make sure that we can react nimbly.
One other thing, too, if I might add, there's also Lindsay struck on something in the first panel. There's also a role that is not often recognized in perceptions of higher education that institutions like ours play, and that's almost a finishing school role. Because when we look at certain areas, she talked about her dental hygiene program, we talked about nursing, cybersecurity, colleges see this with biotechnologies, where students have 4-year degrees and sometimes master's degrees, but they're coming to us to get a finishing skill. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that that 4-year degree was a waste for them. It's just how they're doing it differently. They're using us in a different way, but I think it's also how there's a misconception of higher ed that students, you know, the traditional conception is students come out of high school and they go one place or another, and then that's it, and then we should measure that. But the story of students is going to us, to a Mason, to this, or to go to a college and come to us to get a piece. And so that's the part that's often missed about the broader perspective of higher education.
And one of the things I was tweeting earlier, first panel, because I had such sage comments, but one of the things that a student said was, you know, the important word in community college is community. I think that's what you said, and I tweeted that right away. Because I think both of the presidents here talk about what they're doing to help their community. It's economic development, it's about finishing school, it's about components that support unions and the employers as well, and it's all in the service area where you are. And how do we measure that? How do we talk about the value add of an institution within their economic region and service area and the difference it makes? And sometimes that's a little different than when we look at it at an institutional level at scale nationally, where we're looking at metrics across that don't tell that story.
Well, too, I think it also, in terms of leadership perspective, our goal should be not, you know, yes, do we want to be the best community college in the nation? Yeah, that'd be great. But, you know, the real role for us is to be the best community college for our region in the nation, and that depends on how you build it for the community. And so all of our colleges have to look different because our regions are different and what we do, and I think that's something that sometimes gets lost. I also know, you know, there's the challenge in terms of choice, and you know, there is the importance of the benchmarks and the scorecards, but the truth is for many of our students, like Ariel's experience, his choice is really, I got to go to the community college in my community. My choice is to go where I live, where I can afford to do it, so it's incumbent on each of us to rise to a level of excellence for each of us to serve the communities we serve, because he's going to go to the school in the community where he lives. And that's something that puts a responsibility on all of us to raise the excellence broadly in how we work within our own regions.
Well, how do we, I mean, how do we do that? Because he's very lucky that he lives in Northern Virginia and has you as a president and a community college that's really phenomenal.
I've only been there 2 years. I couldn't have talked about that.
Your predecessor was pretty great too.
Was a great
yeah. But I would venture a guess that that's not the case everywhere, and it's true. I think there's probably many who, I mean, that is the option. That's the only option, and so how do we raise that level of excellence, and how are we measuring quality? How are we thinking about quality and all of that?
I think it's about what we demand out of our institutions, and I think within higher education, you can be a great institutional leader and not necessarily be a great educational or community leader based on the choices that you make. And I think the public should demand of its institutions that they be great, that the leaders in higher ed should be great educational and community leaders, not just institutional leaders. And sometimes that means making choices that don't necessarily benefit your institution, but you know benefit your students and your community. And that's a tough, you get in those places all the time, but that's something that I think the public should demand from higher education.
Building on that question, how do we translate pockets of excellence, bringing things to scale so that people have the ability to learn the best practices across all of your various enterprises and activities, so that in periods where choices, I need to go to the community college in my backyard, that there is the option to have true excellence in the choice that you are selecting. What is the role in policymaking in terms of transferring the best practices across institutions?
In my experience, I think we pretty much all know what the best practices are. You'd ask anyone in higher ed, a high-performing institution, a low-performing institution, they do learning communities, they do undergraduate research, they have outreach programs with the K-12 system, intrusive advising. What we need more is better practitioners. And so when we're thinking about policy and how to drive that, we need to start investing in our institutions so that we have the tools to translate those best practices into action. So it's a lot of professional development and leadership development. At the end of the day, because of the structural issues that I mentioned earlier, it's very difficult for poorly resourced institutions to be able to take their campus community to a place where they can execute consistently at the high quality level that you need to get the high return on those investments. So that's my take on it.
And I think focusing on the students too has an impact, because when you have institutions like the two that are represented here, we have to be frank and say, look, to educate low-income first-generation students, this post-traditional students, is going to cost us more in the short run. They need academic support. They need support services. And at a time where we're pressed against efficiency and effectiveness, being pragmatic like our students were, and they were talking about their options, means we've got to invest in the things that matter. And are you going to see the kind of rates and success you want if you're not investing in the things that students need to be successful? And I do think that's a constant challenge for us, because there's the push-pull between efficiency. We want it to cost as little as possible without acknowledging that there's a lot of need out there and strengths we can build on. That I think that becomes our challenge in getting to some of the scaling up of effective practice. The other is that, we do a lot of work on, we call them evidence-based practices, and we're not quite there at the best practice part because it does depend on the context and the situation. And we've had people say, okay, this works for Latino students. Let's up and lift that effective program in New York City. Let's take it to Arkansas and implement it whole cloth. And what you realize there is, there were a lot of those qualitative things that were also impactful. The social networks, the infrastructure, the connect with the professionals who are prepared to serve that population, that are not as easy to quantify when you're developing the model. And the hard part is that this is hard work. I know we always want the solution, and if it works here, it'll work everywhere. And it can work in more places, but...
That's a very good point, I think, because I think what that means is looking at what is foundationally best practice and success, but not necessarily just at programmatic. There is a rush sometimes to say, CUNY, ASAP. We can learn from ASAP. Cohorts and things work, but not all of us should just say, let's do that. We need to learn from what is foundationally leading to student success, and then learn from what each other are doing differently, but we have to be slower to necessarily say, that's it, everybody do that, and that'll be the magic bullet.
And we have to make sure to include our low-income first-gen students. I can tell you many institutions I've been to where I've got learning communities, I am done. And then you realize that commuting student, that Latino student is not in there, even though we know it works for them, but they are commuting and they don't have time to go to the tutoring center as effective as it is because they got to get to work. So how do we then adapt something we know works for the student's reality? And that's hard.
And look behind the scenes too, because it's really too about innovation at scale. How do you really scale at that level? Because it's easy to boutique it. It's easy to boutique it and put a lot of more resource over here and get a lot of press about this was right over here, but how do you do it at scale? That's the challenging point.
And that's where the practitioners come in, the ability to not only know the best practices, but know how to adapt it to their current realities and take it to scale. In reviewing high-performing institutions in my previous life at the Education Trust, we were looking at over 300 colleges and universities across the country that were making good gains in terms of graduation rates and narrowing gaps. What you would find is that these specific programs, boutique programs, not only were not serving a lot of students, but that they were serving the same students within campus. And so the question is, if you have limited resources, how do you step back and make sure that that a higher fraction of your total student body is at least being touched by one high-impact practice, two better yet? And so that's really part of the challenge in trying to take things to scale, is what is the right intervention for which students at what time that will disproportionately benefit the outcomes that we're looking for.
But you are doing that, because I will say, I'm sorry if I'm jumping in,
Oh, please.
but you guys are doing it at Nova with Pathway to the
That's right,
Baccalaureate.
yeah.
I mean, you've scaled that
Yeah, that's
significantly.
and I think that's what makes it strong, because it is a scaled program. I mean, you've got 11,000 students from high school to community college on to Mason, and so that's a scaled program. But getting to scale is incredibly difficult.
One of the things that I'd like to touch on before we end up getting questions from the audience is, I'm sure for all of you, this is more than an occupation. This is a vocation. This is your passion. And I feel like, especially after listening to the students speak earlier, this is a very human, this is a very personal type of issue. I would love to get from each of you some amount of conversation about the one thing that keeps you up at night, the one thing that is worrying you about higher education right now. And then two, I'd love to engage you on the one thing that sort of brings you inspiration, the one thing that gets you up in the morning excited to take on a job that, as we've all discussed, is incredibly challenging. So.
Did you see the rings under my eyes? What keeps you up at night? I don't know, I guess I'll just start. A lot keeps me up at night, but I will say that part of what, so I'll just try to pick one. I see so much potential and opportunity in the students of today, and it keeps me up at night that we might not be doing right by those students who are trying to do everything right with the infrastructure, the resources, the support of what we're trying to do. And so what can I do in my limited capacity, but with the platform I have, to send that message, to provide that opportunity, to waken people up to the students and the potential they have. That's a framing issue, but I feel like if I can frame it in a certain way, we'll pay attention to who these students are, and we can make that kind of difference, because the commitment, the resources, the responsibility is there. It's just like we're not connecting it all as much as we could to accelerate. So that keeps me up at night. And then what gives me hope is things like that first panel. Mm-hmm. When you hear students who every day are finding a way to make it work for them, sometimes despite us and despite institutions and despite opportunity, they're making it happen. And that, I mean, it strengthens my resolve to do more, but it also shows that there is the kind of success that makes it worthwhile.
Well, I feel incredibly blessed, because I get to be surrounded by inspiration every day. I mean, our two students that were there today, they are exceptional, but I will tell you, they're not uncommon. They are out there, and I'm surrounded by it every single day. So it is just, to have that kind of inspiration is just a blessing. But on the flip side, what concerns me is that the experiences they talked about is that for those students who, their success is not based on, as the runner Steve Prefontaine used to say, it's not how far they got, but the distance from where they started. Is that if they run into a challenge, if they have a stumble, if it's something we created for them, or like you talked about your car experiences or the child care experiences, that can just knock you out of the game in a way for students that go to institutions like ours that would not be at some of the elite institutions that have all kinds of resources there for when that stumble happens or when that barrier happens. And that's what keeps me up at night, is that the difference between success and failure for them can be harsher based on those stumbles that they may not be able, that oftentimes they can't control.
I think I would just echo in terms of inspiration of seeing students like this have success, and I mean, it's happening every day. I think the biggest thing for me, I think two things keeping me up at night. On the sort of equity side, and we work a lot with our partners in Washington on across education, and we're just so challenged, I think, still as a nation when it comes to how well are we serving the hardest to serve. Low income, disadvantaged, minority populations, country from K through 12 all the way up. And then from the employer perspective, as Scott said, we got people without jobs and jobs without people. How is this, right? Lots of people sitting here and we got lots of jobs open, and what are we doing to figure that out? There are jobs out there, and then just this whole notion of the changing economy, and I just think we fundamentally, and I know I've been in enough conversations and enough dinner conversations, and we all come together and wring our hands about what the heck are we going to do when all of the trucking jobs no longer exist, and what are we going to, and I mean, that's a huge challenge to the nation, from policymakers and from all of us in this space that really need to be thinking in a much bolder and broader way about what does all of this look like for the next 100 years. And it may be, radically different than what it looks like now.
I think I draw inspiration from every day, from my students, the faculty, the staff, the community in the Bronx. Being part of a community of teachers, learners, scholars is very inspiring, knowing what the role of higher ed is from the perspective of serving as an engine of opportunity, a vehicle of upward mobility, a driver of transformative change. That's very inspirational. So being part of that anchor institution in a community like the Bronx is inspirational. But that's also the greatest source of worry and concern and keeping me up at night, which is, are we doing everything we can to live up to those aspirations that we have with regards to our institutional mission? And in the current environment that we have from a policy perspective, those concerns are growing every day, because the survey that we just saw indicates that regardless of ideology, there seems to be a perception that higher education is more of a social or public good than it is a private good. Yet a lot of the policy talk that we're hearing seems to be pointing in a different direction. So for institutions such as the one I serve in, that's a very concerning thing.
Thank you all. I think we're going to try to take questions from the audience at this point. So right here in the front.
Hi. Thank you very much for a very enlightened and encouraging discussion. My name is Mike Usdan, and I have a question relating both to the scale, sustainability, and the system disconnected issues that all of you alluded to. Cheryl mentioned the disconnect between the employment system and higher ed. And it seems to me very central to thinking boldly and broadly about the future is to reassess the chasm that exists in most policy systems in most states between the K-12 system and post-secondary education broadly defined. And if we're going to move these issues to scale, it seems to me essential that sets of initiatives in terms of state policy, instead of depending on enlightened individual leadership that we have from both institutions represented here, the issues are so big, the demographics are so compelling, that we have to kind of, I think, rethink K-12 and higher ed in most states. They could be in separate continents. And what incentives can be created, because this is the pipeline. And I would very much appreciate the panel's reaction to what, to me, is a transcendent issue.
I would just throw workforce into that too, right? K-12, the workforce system, the higher ed system as well. I mean, they're all, we're all in our silos doing our thing. And that's at the federal level and the state level and locally as well. And you're right, we, great leaders figure this out. We don't have great leaders everywhere.
I think we can look at policies that drive greater integration. I'll give you an example. Perkins Career Technical Education, just as an example. Our college receives a little less than $400,000 a year in Perkins funding. Now we have a $270 million budget, so that's not a whole lot, right? But could we use those resources to really push between integration between those programs that start, and for pathways that really start in the high schools for students that flow through us? We need to figure out ways to make that happen. It needs to happen between how WIOA and Pell work together in certain ways. It needs to happen in ways that we push for articulation between community colleges and universities so students don't repeat so much courses in that regard. So I think there are ways to look at policy that is not just stays within institutions, but promotes the integration for the pathways that the students really experience, which is from high school, oftentimes through a community college, on to a university.
I think we've probably made tons of progress, but just thinking back to Rob's question about the Spellings Commission, I mean, we, God forbid, tried to talk about things like transfer credits and articulation agreements, and you would have thought we were, I don't know what people thought we were trying to do, but it was like, I mean, this just is sort of no-brainer, makes sense, right? But, so, anyway.
I think that, but it's, we think in policy in transactional terms. I think what you were talking about, Mike, is something that's transformational. And that's why, we studied so much of what is happening at NOVA, which is kind of the pathway to the baccalaureate. You've got like 30-plus partners from K-12, community-based organizations, higher ed, 2-year, 4-year, and they're making it work. And I think maybe it's because of the leadership, but from a policy perspective, I think policy should be informed by good practice. And not all good practice is scalable, but if policy is about scale, how do we find the kinds of elements and models like that work, rather than forcing it down and do things like, we're going to force collective impact and all these partners that aren't authentic, but are there things we can learn that policy can help sustain and support and educate about? I think that's the opportunity that's transformational, and that's not what we're doing. And honestly, that's not how we're measuring it. We measure transactions, and that's a challenge when you're trying to be transformational.
I would just add that there are models out there that we can adapt across states, across systems. Prior to joining Lehman College at the City University of New York, I was at Cal State Fullerton, and was there serving as a provost at a time when all institutions in California were forced by law, SB 1440, to articulate with the community colleges. And that was a very intensive effort that had to pair faculty from individual departments in each one of the 23 campuses of Cal State with their counterparts in the feeder community colleges. But at the end of the day, we saw significant improvements in our ability to graduate students that transferred into Cal State Fullerton because they were coming in with 60 units, and they were guaranteed by law that they can get their bachelor's degree with no more than 60 additional units. And so if we can identify those policies and export them to those places with the right adaptations, I think we would be more successful.
I think California was kind of on the cutting edge too when Charlie Reed was heading that system, right? To sort of reach back into high schools and say, 11th grade, where are you? And are you on track to go to my institution? Yes. And if you're not, let's figure out how we get you there.
That's right.
I think more do that now, but that was like groundbreaking at the time.
I think we have time for one more question.
Amanda Berkson-Shilcock with National Skills Coalition. My question is for President Cruz. It struck me as you were talking that you're doing at an institutional level what your students have to do at an individual level. You're improvising, you're patching together funding, you're braiding resources. But most of the federal and state policy discussion is about the big research universities. So what do you wish that policymakers knew about what it's like to be you?
It's not easy being green. I think it would be important for them to realize, and not just Lehman College of the City University of New York, but that the 2-year and 4-year public sector institutions in the public sector are really the ones that are disproportionately serving students in the U.S. in general, and particularly students that are low income and students of color that are quickly becoming the new majority. So that I would hope they would see that in order for our nation to be secure and prosperous moving forward, they have to start looking not only at those elite institutions but also at these 2 and 4-year institutions, and providing us the resources we need to take care, to add value, particularly given the deficiencies of the K-12 system, the disinvestments that have happened there, to add value to those students so that they can contribute to society moving forward. There's a lot of innovation going on in 2-year and 4-year schools, and we can really move the needle if more attention is paid to us.
I think we're at time at this point, so before we break, I just want to thank the panelists once again. It's been incredibly educational, so thank you all.